The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, ever since Vice President Vance, speaking at the Nixon Presidential Library, said correctly that President Richard Nixon was taken down by the same insidious deep state forces that tried to take Donald Trump down, we've had a renewed interest in the presidency and the events surrounding Richard Nixon's takedown, but also his accomplishments as president. They call it Nixon Maxing, and it is really the brainchild of two brilliant young guys, James Byron, who was the chief executive officer of the Nixon Foundation, and the young marketing director there. They're using memes on Instagram, X, YouTube, and so on to launch this completely new interest in our 37th president. If I have anything to say about it, I guess it would be, well, I told you so. It is amazing to watch. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump gave a national address to the nation last Thursday, although if you were watching network television, you wouldn't have known it because CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, and the rest of the lamestream media refused to carry the president's remarks. I find that really odd in view of the fact that they carried Joe Biden's national address, in which he basically said that anyone who disagreed with him politically was a dangerous extremist. That speech they carried. You may remember that speech. It was a very, very dark speech. Later on in the show, Chris Jersky joins us. Chris Jersky is an election integrity expert. He is the head of an organization called the People's Audit that is set up to help have honest, fair, free elections. We're going to talk about his analysis of the president's remarks. I, of course, expected that when the President of the United States announced that 200 million voter records from the United States had been purloined by the Communist Chinese, and more importantly, that our intelligence services, the FBI, the CIA, and so on, had kept that information from him, I, of course, expected that, well, somebody would be arrested the next day. Of course, that didn't happen. We're going to talk about that later with Chris Jersky. But right now, federal authorities are investigating what the FBI describes as an anti-government attack outside of 26 Federal Plaza in Lower Manhattan. I know that building well. That's where former President Richard Nixon had his office in his post-presidential years. Spent many hours in that building. According to the FBI, a suspect allegedly deployed an incendiary device outside the federal building, which houses offices for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Department, better known as ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, as well as the Social Security Administration. Federal agents reportedly rushed from the building with weapons drawn before the Federal Protective Service officers took a suspect into custody. Authorities identified the suspect as one Andrew Arabaka. Investigators also said he carried a sign reading "Ice off our streets." Well, it's not wintertime. In fact, it's so hot you could fry an egg on the sidewalk. The FBI's New York Joint Terrorism Task Force is now leading the investigation into this attack. Police reportedly recovered a firearm connected to the incident, although officials have not confirmed whether it was found on the suspect. You know, the political messaging surrounding this attack cannot be ignored. For years now, violence associated with far-left causes has often been minimized as isolated unrest, even when federal law enforcement officers were increasingly vilified by radical leftists and politicians. Groups like the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center told the feds to look the other way and focus on President Trump and his supporters and other so-called white supremacists. Well, that's not me. As a result, the radical leftist threat has only metastasized. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani called the incident deeply disturbing, but his movement has played a significant role, in my view, in dividing this country and radicalizing these disturbed liberals. The anti-ICE organizations that were part of the coalition to elect Mamdani have created a dangerously hostile climate towards the men and women enforcing federal law, people who are just doing their jobs. The Trump administration has warned that far-left political violence must be treated as domestic terrorism, and I agree. I would argue this is probably the most pressing threat to the future of our nation, other than the question that we don't seem to be able to have a free, fair, and honest election. But Antifa must be considered somewhat like ISIS. They're enemy combatants, and I believe they must be treated as such. Meanwhile, it was great to see President Donald Trump take center stage at Sunday's FIFA World Cup final at the Met Stadium right there in New Jersey, joining Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney as the leaders of the tournament's three host nations watched Spain face Argentina. President Trump was seated along First Lady Melania Trump, who as always looked great, and near FIFA President Gianni Infantino. Before kickoff, the president was shown the World Cup trophy and was expected to join Infantino in presenting it to the winning team after the match. Speaking with Fox Sports before the game, President Trump raised the tournament as beautiful and said that international visitors have been given a chance to see what a great country America is. The appearance capped another moment for a president who has made a point of showing up for the biggest events in sports. Trump also attended the Super Bowl, the NBA Finals, and, of course, the UFC events, connecting with fans beyond Washington's political class. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called the visit a fitting conclusion to a tournament that demonstrated America's ability to host the world on the grandest stage. Now, many Europeans and foreigners have come here and been astounded about how beautiful and hospitable a country the United States is, despite the false and biased media coverage indicating the contrary that you see abroad. They're surprised when they get here. President Trump also signaled that he'd like to see the United States hold a future World Cup of its own. Left-wing activists attempted to inject politics into the finals by distributing red cards and urging fans to protest Donald Trump and President Infantino during the trophy presentation, but those futile efforts seemed to mostly fizzle out. The image here was unmistakable. America hosting the world and the quintessential American president proudly displaying our nation on the global stage. Meanwhile, if you've had trouble breathing, you're not alone. We've all been choking with smoke from the Canadian fires. President Trump is demanding accountability from Canada as wildfire once again pours across the border and threatens the health of millions of Americans. In what I would have to call a blistering True Social post, President Trump said the economic damage caused by Canada's failure to manage its forests should be added to existing tariffs on Canadian goods. The president accused the Canadian officials of neglecting basic forest management, including brush clearing and debris removal, allowing dangerous smoke to become a costly annual crisis now for the United States. Trump called the polluted air dangerous and totally unacceptable, arguing that American families, businesses, and taxpayers should not be forced to absorb billions of dollars in damage caused by another country's negligence. More than 100 million people reportedly under air quality alerts last week, with smoke affecting major cities including Minneapolis, Chicago, Detroit, and yes, Washington, D.C. Concerns were also raised about conditions surrounding last night's World Cup final in New Jersey. Thankfully, those concerns did not come to fruition, and the game could be played without interruption. The Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, responded by emphasizing clean energy policy and criticizing American energy production, as if this is our fault. This is a typical response from a bureaucrat who wants to shirk responsibilities. However, Canada has neglected its responsibility to properly maintain its forests, and its national government has failed to prevent predictable disasters from repeatedly harming their neighbors. This is bureaucratic incompetence and malevolence at work, and it needs to be punished through tariffs. President Trump said he's planning to speak directly to Carney about Canada's response, but Prime Minister Carney is no doubt dreading that call. The bottom line is that America should not pay the price for foreign mismanagement. Whether the damage comes from unfair trade, illegal immigration, or polluted air crossing the border, the United States has every right to defend its citizens and to demand compensation. Canada will have to suffer the economic consequences if it doesn't get its wildfire situation under control. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is putting states on notice they must secure their elections, clean up their voter rolls, or their federal grant money will be going bye-bye. Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin said participation in the SAVE election integrity program will become a condition for states seeking DHS funding connected to federal elections. Finally, some actual consequences. The program allows states to work with federal officials to identify potentially ineligible voters and to strengthen voting system security. President Donald Trump announced Thursday that the Department of Homeland Security had been ordered to alert states about suspected non-citizens on their voter rolls and demand the immediate removal of anyone legally ineligible to vote. Secretary Mullin said that states seeking federal reimbursement must secure their voting machines and regularly scrub their voter registration lists. The standard, he argued, is that only legally eligible American citizens should be choosing American leaders. Seems like common sense to me. The Department of Homeland Security has identified more than 250,000 potential non-citizen registrants in California, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Nevada alone. I mean, the sheer number of these illegals who potentially could vote in elections underscores why accurate voter rolls matter. When there's bad data in the system, they can enable widespread fraud. And of course, the Democrats, they know this. That's why it's down to a science during the fraudulent presidential election of 2020. Regardless of the obfuscations of the Democrats, protecting election integrity is not voter suppression. It's actually the foundation of public trust. Every illegal ballot risks canceling the vote of a lawful voter, and states accepting federal election money should be expected to meet basic security requirements without exception. Secretary Mullin also criticized major television networks, as I did earlier, for declining to carry President Trump's historic election security address just last week, accusing the media of ignoring legitimate national security concerns. The administration has not wavered in its stance that citizenship must mean something, that voting laws must be enforced, and that federal taxpayers should never subsidize states that refuse to protect the ballot. It's time to cut off the states that run elections like a third-world debacle. Meanwhile, comedian Shane Gillis has delivered a knockout blow to cancel culture. On Friday night, the Pennsylvania native sold 77,047 tickets to a solo performance at the Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia, setting a new Guinness World Record for comedy ticket sales. Nearly 74,000 people packed the home of the Eagles, surpassing the previous attendance record set in Berlin. That was back in 2008. The achievement is particularly satisfying because Gillis was once treated as radioactive by the entertainment establishment. In 2019, Saturday Night Live hired him, then they fired him before he ever appeared after old podcast jokes were dragged into the outrage machine and declared politically incorrect. But you see, the public here had other ideas. Instead of disappearing, Gillis built his audience directly through YouTube, podcasts, touring, and Netflix specials, his 2021 special, Live in Austin, and his 2023 Beautiful Dogs helped turn him into one of the biggest and hottest comedians in America. Over the past 2 years, he has sold more than 1 million tickets and broken attendance records at arenas across the country. The record-setting hometown triumph for Gillis featured many celebrities across the spectrum, including Dave Chappelle, Meek Mill, Jason Kelce, Cooper DeJean, and Jordan Matalana, but Gillis also shattered Kevin Hart's previous stadium record in Philadelphia. So the message could not be clearer. Cancel culture is losing its iron grip on society. Americans are tired of humor being policed by corporate gatekeepers and professional scolds. These creeps almost destroyed comedy completely in the 2010s and has never been based on market demand. It was censorship based on rigid ideological bounds. Your comedy had to be politically correct. Of course, you could always get an audience if you would just attack President Donald Trump. The people clearly want comedians who are fearless, honest, and politically incorrect. Shane Gillis was supposed to be canceled. Instead, he came back bigger, louder, and more successful than ever. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone. Don't go away because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone. Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant political analyst.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Coming up next, Chris Jersky, who's the head of the People's Audit, joins us to talk about whether America can have a fair, free, honest election in 2026. You're going to want to stick around for that. The Republican National Committee is taking 6 states to court over election laws that allow people who have never lived in those states to cast absentee ballots. Republican National Chairman Joe Gruters, a longtime friend of mine, says if you have never lived in a state, you should not be deciding its elections, a notion that to me seems like common sense. The legal challenge follows a Republican victory in North Carolina, where a judge struck down a law allowing citizens born overseas who had never lived in the state to vote using their parents' former address. Now, the Republican National Committee has noted that the lawsuits do not target military personnel, diplomats, or other Americans protected under federal overseas voting laws. Instead, they focus on civilians with no service record, no genuine residency connection beyond a relative's old mailing address. Nevada could be the biggest test. Nevada is a state that mails an absentee ballot, a mail-in ballot, to everyone on the voter rolls, whether they request one or not. Last time I was actually in Nevada, a guy showed me 5 separate ballots, all of them mailed to him at the same address. I said, "What is this?" He said, "Well, one of them is me." I said, "Well, who are the other 4? He said, "Those are people who rented my apartment prior to my living there." I said, "And they're still actively on the voting list?" He said, "Well, if I was dishonest, I could have cast all 4 of these votes, which of course would have been a federal crime." I said, "Well, who are the other people?" He said, "Well, 2 of them are dead. One of them still lives in Nevada, but they are registered at another address, and the other one has moved out of state." Ah, now you see the problem. I'm Roger Stone. To listen to Stone Zone, don't go away because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Well, last Thursday night, I was in Washington, D.C. for the President's address to the nation. It's a good thing I was there because if I wanted to see it on the national news networks, I wouldn't have been able to find it. For some strange reason, an address of this importance was not covered by ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and the rest. But the president essentially said that he was declassifying documents that proved that the Communist Chinese had accessed over 220 million voter records of American voters. Of course, I expected there to be arrests of somebody the next morning because this information was kept from the president by those in our intelligence services, the FBI, the CIA, and so on. Of course, that hasn't happened. But I did know immediately who I wanted to have as a guest for today's show, and that is Chris Jersky. Now, Chris Jersky is an entrepreneur who helps scale organizations. He troubleshoots security, financial, and operational issues, then he builds systems to fix them. While looking at the 2020 election, one of the most startling discoveries was that people who sold their homes and moved out of the state were actually still voting from their Florida residences. So Chris Jersky created the People's Audit to help Florida citizens check who's voting from their homes. But since 2024, he's joined forces with Eagle AI, a firm, to build a new system called Elly, E-L-L-Y, that currently monitors 46 states and D.C. Chris Jersky, welcome into the Stone Zone.
Thanks for having me back.
So, Chris, how do you feel about the president's address the other night, and what are the implications?
Well, much like you and some of the other people that fought all the way through 2020, and especially some of the people that went up to Washington for January 6th, I feel vindicated to at least be that it's been addressed. But just like you said earlier, we're still hopeful and waiting for the arrest, because there is no real solutions until people go to jail and are punished for what they did here. And the other thing is the systems themselves. The systems are all still in place. Exactly what we had in 2020 is still, all that entire regime is still in place.
That is precisely my concern. I mean, first of all, I am astounded by the mainstream media and their Democratic handmaidens' ability to continue to say, with a straight face, that there's no evidence whatsoever of election irregularities, no evidence of voter fraud, no evidence of ballot fraud, no evidence of problems with paper ballots, mail-in ballots, no problems with the machine, and that if you say otherwise, you're some kind of a dangerous nut, even though, of course, you have a First Amendment right to say exactly that. What I've seen, I think you would agree with this, is overwhelming evidence of irregularities. Let's try to take this apart. Where is the greatest danger here? Is it in the voter lists? Is it in the manipulability and instability and insecurity of the machines? Or is it in the mail-in ballots? Or is it all three?
It's all of the above. And also, I would add to that is the political machinery that sets themselves up. You probably know about a lot of the grassroots being squeezed out of the local politics in Florida. That's one of the oldest ways of basically pushing and manipulating politics. But I think the biggest part of the fuel that goes into the steel starts with the voter rolls, and it ends up with mail-in ballots mostly. They can generate as many voters as they need, and then with mail-in ballots, send those votes in.
So how do we fix our voter lists? Let's start there.
The biggest thing is that there's laws already on the books. NVRA, which stands for the National Voter Registration Act, that was created in 1993. This was long before the machines came along. Was clear in black and white that the citizens, the voter rolls belong to the citizens, and that the locals have a duty to make sure that the voter rolls are cleaned of what's very important, ineligible voters. A lot of the problems we have now with most of these states, because I monitor changes month to month, is they're not removing anybody. Most of the time, they basically just go ahead and mark people as inactive, and then they keep them on the voter rolls, and it's kind of like fuel that whenever they need to have an extra vote, they have this pool of people that they can pull from, either be it real or people that have moved out of state or died. The reality is that there's just a number of ways that they could reach in and grab these voters and then basically set them as a mail-in ballot. And it's happened over and over again. People show up at the polls and they're being told at the polls that they've already voted when they have no idea what they're talking about. So essentially mail-in ballots are coming in for these people when they're not paying attention and voting on their behalf.
So how do we fix this?
One of the things we did was we built a system called ELI that is going through and following NVRA, that law, to a T, essentially using the tools that they outlined in 1994 of how to clean the voter rolls. But it goes far beyond that. Really, it's basically citizen involvement. We've seen the biggest tides turn when citizens and the grassroots get involved. And our system is designed to have volunteers come in and basically give them the opportunity to look over their local voter rolls and find issues and bring those to their local officials. And I think that's really what was the model in Florida. We removed like 2 million voters out of the voter rolls between 2024 and 2025, and a grand majority of those just happened to be Democrat. It wasn't like we were looking for them. But the biggest problems we had in Florida were like apartment complexes and things like that, where people moved out and basically were already living in another state, just they were never removed from the voter rolls. But it goes more than that. I mean, ultimately, we have to get back to a paper ballot and basically a hand-counted paper ballot at the local station. That, I think, is going to be the ultimate solution. The voter rolls are just the first start of it, and the voter rolls are ongoing throughout the entire year, whereas our elections just happen on that, hopefully one day, instead of like in California for an entire month.
Yeah, I want to ask you what you thought of that Los Angeles election, because it seemed to me, look, I'm not a mathematician, but it seemed to me that these late arriving ballots defied mathematical probability when they went 80% for the candidate who was on election night was running third and a poor third. She even conceded. And then suddenly in the days afterwards, there's a spurt of thousands of new ballots. And there's two Democrats in the race. Remember, they have this jungle primary system in which any candidate of any party runs in one election. So you have multiple Democrats. In this case, I think you also had multiple Republicans, but one principal Republican. Then you see this influx of ballots that defy mathematical probability. But we both know nothing will be done about that, will it?
Well, I mean, the people keep on waking up and seeing it. I think that where we started in 2020, especially in Florida, when we said that the voter or the elections were rigged here, they kind of laughed it off. But after Kerry Lake and what's name the Los Angeles election you're talking about, more and more people are realizing that the game is fixed, and especially with these late count votes, that's the most obvious, where they just count until they get the right count, and then the election's called. But that's the whole thing. Like, we call it that F curve that is famous for the 2020 election, that Biden had 80 million votes come out of just nowhere at the last minute. And as you said, that the grand majority of the last remaining votes were all for Biden. If you do anything in math or statistics, they usually can, that's how they do typical polling, is they could figure out like where the election is going by basically doing sample sizes. And those samples stay pretty close to one another. It's very strange and absolutely suspicious when you see a large number of votes towards one candidate come all in at the last minute. It doesn't make any logical sense.
If you really want to see a Democrat or a liberal go out of their mind, suggest to them that the computerized voting machines are less than perfect, that they're insecure, that they can be hacked, that the numbers can be manipulated. I've seen online, as you have, and sometimes in person, overwhelming evidence of it. But once again, if you have the audacity to say that in public, you'll find yourself very quickly canceled. You'll find yourself, like me, no longer allowed to be on Facebook, no longer allowed to be on Instagram, no longer allowed to be on YouTube. They take your voice if you merely ask questions. But address for us, if you will, your view of these electronic voting machines and the level of security.
The biggest thing is anything that's digital can be fabricated. It's essentially like why you go buy a house. You have to show up and actually sign your documents in person with a notary. You can imagine that as soon as you walked out of that building, if it was a digitized contract, they could change anything they want, including the interest rate or whatever. That's why we, as a normal civil society, have been using paper documentation with signatures and witnesses for centuries as the actual like physical presence of you basically being there and voting. Anything can be happening with these voter machines. They can change who's voting. They can change as many people as they want. They can change the results at the last minute. They can actually make it as much as an audit-proof seal as possible, because when you're looking through the digital records, it will appear that those ballots are there. We've even had situations in Georgia where they went through and they found duplicated images and fabricated images where the ovals were filled in and pressed in for different candidates. And unless you're looking at a piece of paper, when you're physically holding a piece of paper, you could probably get the sense that something's wrong, especially if you see like a flat oval. It looks more like something printed at. But whenever a human touches a piece of paper, there's usually an imprint when they're physically filling in an oval. So it's just much like your fingerprint. That's why it's very hard to cheat at scale if they tried to basically have a hand-counted paper ballot. That would put that all to rest, because at the local level, you might hear every small races where they still do that. And just like they did back in New York, Tammany Hall is much famous for that. But it would go a long way to stopping people stealing a governor's race, a senator's race, a presidency, things like that. You can cheat at scale now when it's all digital.
You're exactly right. I remember a couple of years ago when I went to vote, the person in line in front of me, let's call him John Smith, presented photo ID, a driver's license, and stated his address. And the clerk behind the desk, who's a day worker, said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, you voted this morning." He said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Yes, you definitely voted this morning." And he said, "Let me ask you a question. Is there also an Alma Smith registered at the same address as I am?" She looked at the voter rolls and she said, "Yes, she voted also." He said, "Well, that's my mother. She's been dead for 15 years, so she could not possibly vote." In the end, they let him cast a provisional ballot. Who knows whatever happened to it? I doubt it was counted. I got a text from a woman after yesterday's show who sent me a video of she and others presenting 43,000 affidavits from people in Arizona, all of whom had gone to vote, all of whom had shown up at a polling place, all of whom had been told they had already voted. In this case, the governor, Kemp, rather than accept this, slipped out the back door of the building. So this is an enormous ongoing problem. And I'm not optimistic about 2026. I wish I was, but as you correctly point out, although I think we've identified the problems don't seem to have been fixed. Federalizing our elections is not the answer. It's interesting, that's what the Democrats wanted to do in House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1. They wanted to federalize the elections. I still think it's best that states regulate their own elections, but the idea that Florida is the gold standard of elections, as the governor told us. If you live in Broward County, that's a pretty laughable statement.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing is, especially when it's digital, you can imagine, like, as we watch anything from stock trading or anything else, that information is instantly available anywhere in the world. So they could steal anything from a sheriff's race all the way up to the presidency, and they don't even need to be in the country because they could be watching it from a dashboard thousands of miles away and manipulating our final results. And that's what's so infuriating about all of it, because essentially you would think that our local officials, and especially our parties, would want to support our local people. But it seems like the internationalists, the globalists have basically just bought them out, because they don't have any. We've been pushed back ever since the very beginning, trying to fix stuff in Florida as well as other states to get any meaningful change. We've had a couple small things cleaning things up here and there, but again, the biggest thing I see is the fraud that's with the mail-in ballots and the machines.
I've taken the view that they use the machines to determine the results. Then they determine based on that how many votes they need. Then they just create those ballots based on names on the voter rolls of people who either never really existed, no longer exist, or have moved out of state or passed away. I think that's exactly the game that's being played. So you can't point to any one piece of this. It's not just the voter rolls. It's not just the mail-in ballots. It's not just the absentees. It's not just the machines. It's all of those things. Seems to me that they all need to be fixed. Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Chris Gursky with the People's Audit, and we're talking about whether the 2026 elections can be free, fair, and honest. We'll talk about it some more when we come back, so don't go away.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. It's really hard for me to believe that almost 6 years after the 2020 election, that we're still talking about the need for election integrity reforms. If you're just tuning in, we're finishing our interview with Chris Gursky with the People's Audit. Chris has done amazing work here in the Sunshine State of Florida to try to work for clean, fair, honest elections. Now he's working with Eagle AI, a firm building a system called Ellie that currently monitors the elections in 46 states and the District of Columbia. Chris, tell us about Ellie and what you're doing there.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Ellie because Ellie is probably the first of its kind that will follow NVRA, which is the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, to the T. It's really the only federally backed compliance tool that we have to watch the voter rolls. And the main reason for that is because we're checking to see if people have moved, if they've died, or if they've registered in another state. And we also give that information to both the local county officials as well as the citizens for free. We do ask for donations to help us out with voter rolls. Voter rolls are quite expensive in some states, like in the case of Alabama, with $40,000 just to ask for one instance of a voter roll. But that system is basically probably just a complete game changer, where you can click on a voter and you can immediately see now where they've moved to. We even have property data to see if they've now deeded a house in that new state. So you have proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that this person has been moved and needs to be removed from the voter rolls.
It's quite simple, but it's really quite brilliant. All you're doing here is taking the list of known individuals who have moved, registered in another state, and so on, and comparing it to the voter rolls. Of course, they make it as expensive as possible. Of course, if people want to find you and support your work, where can they go?
The easiest thing to do is come to our website at thepeoplesaudit.org. That's going to be the-peoples-audit.org. And there they'll find links to my Substack, my Telegram, and X, as well as we'll put some links out there to start inviting people to Ellie. Ellie right now is invitation only, but we're basically up to about 500 members from various states. It's just a lot of training to go into that system right away. So we want to make sure people get their hands held and know what to do when they're into that data, because it could be overwhelming.
All right. So here's the man with the plan, Chris Jersky, who's joined us. And I think we did a pretty good job here today of outlining the need for reform. It's still hard for me to believe that 6 years after the fact, 6 years after what I think was quite obviously the discrepancies, the anomalies, the outright fraud in the 2020 election, we're still arguing about this. But as you correctly point out, both parties seem to be in on it, at least in some states. And there's nobody else raising these questions. That's why it's up to citizens like Chris Jersky and the People's Audit to raise these questions and keep fighting for honest elections. Chris, I want to thank you for joining us today in the Stone Zone, and also thank our audience. Folks, thanks for joining us today. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?